Okay, at this time, we can do public comments. If you have any public comments, please limit all comments to 3 minutes or less. Any presented material may be submitted to council members. Please include 10 copies of each. Do we have any public comments? Please state your name and your county of residence.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Sidwell. I'm a resident of Wicomico County, District 3. I am also the Events and Development Manager for Wicomico Public Libraries. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are standing on land that once belonged to the Algonquian Indians. And I say that because when we articulate our history, our shared history, it lives on in the present and in our memory. Secondly, I want to thank Ashley Teagle for her leadership. It's unfortunate that Wicomico County is losing her as library director. Third, I would like to point out, as Mrs. Teagle said, that Wicomico Public Libraries is the least funded library per capita in the state of Maryland. The library has been flat funded for at least 3 years straight. One of the things I do in my role at the library is research and write grants to help us meet the growing needs of a diverse community, because the county budget simply does not provide enough money for us to meet those needs. The amount of public tax dollars funding libraries is minimal at best. Yet, according to a recent study by Beacon at Salisbury University, for every dollar invested in Wicomico Public Libraries, the public receives a return investment of at least $5. Ms. Teagle mentioned one of the grants we recently got, $84,000 to purchase laptops and hotspots to lend to residents who do not have access. And I think we've seen that the need for that because of COVID and the homeschooling that's been happening. Another grant we received during COVID is from the Library of America. It's called the Lift Every Voice Grant. Our library is one of only 49 libraries in the nation to receive this grant to host poetry workshops with local teens and young adults. And I should mention this grant is in conjunction with the release of a book celebrating 250 years of African-American poetry, struggle, and song. I wrote this grant back in February and March in partnership with Amber Green of Phoenix Youth Project, because the library has successfully partnered with her organization before in serving our youth. And she's amazing at it, I will say. I'm here today because I'm concerned that a member of the council has been questioning the library's partnership with Phoenix Youth Project, a nonprofit that not only helps youth learn to express themselves through art and poetry, but also serves our homeless youth and teens, and has recently started partnering with the Vulnerable Populations Task Force in giving food away on Wednesdays in October. I would like to remind the County Council that the library is not a place for censorship of ideas or programs, and that any member of the council trying to interfere with grant money or determine what the library does with grant money would be a huge overreach of power. This is governed by the granting organization, and the library is bound by our agreements with said grantors. It is expressly stated in the library's mission and vision that we serve all residents in the county, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, ability, creed, sexual orientation, and so on. Likewise, the duty of the members of the County Council is also to serve all residents of the county as elected public servants. This member of the County Council has specifically asked me for copies of the grant, the narrative that was written, the acceptance of the grant, and what we hope to achieve, the outcomes, and so on. I have offered to answer specific questions about the grant or to address concerns, but nothing really specific was asked, just that there was concern about our partnership with Phoenix Youth Project. Now, everything about this grant is public knowledge. The theme of our first project is Black experience in history and memory. Phoenix Youth Project, the library, the Edward H. Knabb Research Center, and the Salisbury Lynching Memorial Task Force are working with teens and young adults to help them record the history and memories of elders in our community around racial injustice and its effects on our community. The youth involved in this program will learn how to conduct interviews and collect oral histories, as well as how to use poetry as a medium of expression. They will create their own community poem by the end of the project. Now, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this grant and the programs we've created. Furthermore, I invite all members of the council who have any concerns about any of our programs to attend a program on the library calendar. We would love to have your presence and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Katrina Purnell. Please excuse me. I too am in support of the library. I'm very hurt that Ms. Teagle is leaving. She is such a star, and for all that she does, I am offended that in 2020, that we have to still go back things of hundreds of years ago as far as who a person is. For us not to be proud of being Black and have it honored only 1 month a year, I do not understand the concern that someone would have, and they have 11 months. Just so if that person is listening, air conditioning, an automatic fishing rod, auto gear, blood plasma, we've heard of that because of Corona, and anybody that has been in the hospital has had a transfusion or given blood. Cable coupling devices, the couplers that you see on trains, air conditioning or freezers for trains. We know we need that because you get frozen food. Where would Purdue and other businesses be without it? Gas masks, fire extinguishers, golf tees, hair brushes, ironing board, lawn mowers, lawn sprinklers, brown paper bags. Before we got fancy, I used one when I went to school. Lubricating couplers. We've heard of the phrase, the real McCoy, the man who invented the engine and the coupling device. They used oil to lubricate it. So without that, I guess we're all walking home. I just want to get this done. I'm just so offended. Where would jelly be without peanut butter? Just some of the things that we have invented. We are not a cat people. We have contributed to everything that has gone in this country. Refrigerators, riding saddles, shampoo, spark plugs, fastener devices, stethoscopes. Oh, isn't that what doctors use? Stove, telephone transmitters. I know that to be true. Traffic signals, tricycles, typewriters, all of these things that have been done, and all we ask is for the respect that we give you, that you give us.
Thank you, Mr. Purnell. Do we have any more comments? We got a lady up there first.
Good evening. My name is Connie Rayner. I live on Porter Mill Road. I was asked to read this letter from my neighbor concerning the DAF tank. Dear council members and meeting participants, this is my testimonial to be read during the county council meeting scheduled for Tuesday, October 6, 2020. This testimonial is in regard to the dissolved air flotation DAF tank located on Porter Mill Road in Wicomico County. My husband and I moved to Porter Mill Road over 20 years ago, and I have enjoyed the beauty and tranquility of this wonderful neighborhood during that time. This part of Wicomico County is filled with wonderful rural experiences like tending a vegetable garden, reading a good book on a shaded deck, and taking long walks down a country road. At night, we can open a window and sleep soundly listening to the owl calls in the trees. However, these rural experiences are now being threatened by a new neighbor that is responsible for destroying our way of country life. Our new neighbor is the DAF tank owned by someone who does not live here or have to suffer its consequences. This owner cares nothing about the people who live in the tank's neighboring area or show any integrity, as evidenced by the way he represented the operation of the tank to the county. We firmly believe that he misled the Planning and Zoning Committee on what he was going to do with this tank. Since this tank was installed, our country road has become a highway for the delivery and removal of DAF, a disgusting mix of animal renderings and restaurant sludge. Tank trucks go by my home all hours of the day and night. I am awakened by the rumbling of heavy trucks at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 a.m. nightly. I am now suffering from the unusual sleep pattern that affects my day. And then, during the day, the trucks rumble by, sometimes only 15 minutes apart. Back and forth they go past my house that is only about 40 feet from the road. Anyone who thinks this DAF tank operation is an agricultural endeavor is gravely mistaken. This is an industrial waste management operation, plain and simple. Furthermore, I question the actual ownership of this business and speculate that it is more than a coincidence that the cornfield at the top of Porter Mill Road transformed to a sod farm right before the tank permit process started. I implore the county council to appeal to the county executive to reverse the approval of the building permit of the DAF tank on Porter Mill Road and to change the county zoning laws to prohibit the building of DAF tanks in the county. I am profoundly worried about my quality of life, my investment in my home, and the well-being of all the residents of Wicomico County. Sincerely, Pamela Ozeski.
Thank you.
Gary Mansell, Porter Mill Road. I believe I was talking last year, and you mentioned that the fact that the smell, the chicken manure, what they spread on the fields. Ali Eckhart came down, just about threw up. It is not chicken manure. You imagine ammonia mixed with rotting flesh. That's what you smell. You can't sit in your backyard. You can't have a party, a picnic, nothing, because of this person here putting this tank up illegally too. It's as plain as simple on the paper he applied. Absolutely. Wicomico County now, in Hebron, we're known as the cesspool of Wicomico. Anybody with the money can dump what they want from out of state anywhere into that tank. That tank is now full to capacity. I'd like any one of you to come down. Addie did. Come down and smell what we have to smell, how it's ruined our life. On a week, this is 1 week, he was talking about the traffic in Hebron. You imagine over 100 tanker trucks a day. Times that by 7, 24 hours a day. Not 9 to 5, 24 hours a day. You need no alarm clock anymore. You can wake up at 4, 5. Tanker trucks, and they don't drive slow. We clocked one at 55 miles an hour going down Porter Mill Road. And coincidentally, one ran me off the road this morning on Riggin. Can't wait for those school buses to get on that road. It's going to be great, man. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Any more comments? Yes, ma'am.
Lynette Kenny, Porter Mill Road. And first I want to thank you folks for listening to us over the past year. I appreciate the fact that you have put the moratorium on and then went back and overrode the veto of the moratorium. I appreciate that. I know you've taken steps to try to understand this issue. The meetings that you've had, and I know you mentioned last year that you wanted to meet with MDA. I don't know if you have or not, but that needs to happen. But you also could probably gain some knowledge by talking to the folks of us that live with this, live within the smell of this thing, and listen to what we've learned over the past year about this and going forward. Thinking about that, we've been called, said that our research, we have not done our research and our homework on this issue or for this. And we have really spent literally hundreds of hours knocking on doors, getting testimonies from people who live near this stuff. We have made, I don't know how many phone calls. We've gone to seminars. We've just done everything we can think of to inform ourselves and to get a handle on what's going on. And to say that this is going to be the only tank in the county, I think you need to rethink that, because this tank is full. We have a picture of a flyover today. Thursday, it probably had another 5 feet to go. Today, it's probably only about that far. I think it's limited to 10 to 12 inches from the top. It's there. And the other tank, I understand, in near Mardella is also 3/4 full. Why are they putting this in here now when they said it was supposed to only be from mid-December to the end of February? They did not start putting this stuff in here until the 1st of March, when they said that they were going to be emptying it. And it's been a steady flow of traffic back and forth, probably putting it in, taking it out, putting it in, taking it out. But right now, it's a full tank, and December's not even here. So what are they going to do in December? I understand that the crops are coming out now, and they'll probably be putting the DAF on the crops pretty soon. So there'll be a lot of more traffic in there to take it out and to put it on the fields, the DAF on the fields. What I would like to say is also that through this process of trying to figure out what we were supposed to do, because we had no idea, we as neighbors made appointments, came in and spoke to planning and zoning. We made phone calls. We were told that the only recourse we had was to go to the Ag Reconciliation Committee. And when we looked at it, we saw this does not have a thing to do with a building permit. And you know that, and we found that out. And so the Ag Reconciliation Committee was really not the route to go. And we've also been told that the permit was legally permitted, and that that was it. It was a done deal. There was nothing we could do about it. And we trusted exactly what we were told. And that's where part of the problem came in, is that we trusted what we were told. I want to talk a little bit about agriculture, and I think this is important because even when we first started, the first time I stood up here, I said, we are not up here to ask you to regulate and control agriculture. We have heard people say in the county that it's a slippery slope, that if you regulate this, it'll open the door for whatever else regulations they want to put on agriculture. But in our research, I want you to know that other counties in the state of Maryland already do indeed regulate the DAF product. Other states do too, as Delaware and Virginia is the ones I specifically called. And it has not harmed agriculture at all. They still grow their chickens, they still process chickens, they still sell a whole lot of chickens, and they still employ a lot of people in the chicken industry. And we brought to your attention last year that this same owner tried to build a storage tank in Dorchester, but because their permitting process required a hearing for a special exception, the application was drawn the day of the hearing. Talbot County regulates something called an organic resource recovery facility, which uses poultry waste and poultry processing waste in an anaerobic digester. Delaware, which also has a lot of poultry processors, considers DAF an industrial waste. Their regulation and oversight is much more strict than what we have here in Maryland. DNREC is the regulating authority. Applicators must be permitted, and their permit can be revoked for noncompliance. And indeed, they told me they did revoke a permit of one of the applicators because they just weren't doing it right. In Virginia, the product is governed by the Department of Environmental Quality. The application of DAF became a very contentious issue about 10 years ago, is what I was told. And the regulations became much more stringent. And I find it very interesting that a lot of the DAF that is brought here to Wicomico County comes from Virginia and Delaware to be spread on our farmlands here in this county. And interestingly enough, I have not seen Mount Air, with all of their legal problems that they've been in for the past, 10 years, they've not pulled out of Delaware. And I've not seen Purdue's or Tyson pull out of Virginia because of the more stringent regulations of DAF. So they bring it here to Wicomico County because somehow we have believed that to regulate even the storage of such a stinking product as DAF will harm agriculture. That is a notion that needs to change. Also about agriculture, we have a definitive ruling as to whether, we have not had a definitive ruling as to whether the DAF is industrial or agriculture. MDE in our conversations with them, consider it industrial. MDA considers something else. It is waste generated by rendering or poultry processing activity. If this is such a wonderful, nutrient-rich product, why aren't farmers lined up with money in their hands to pay for it? The only money changing hands is to pay a farmer to put it on his land. Farmers pay for chicken manure because they know that it is a good nutrient value for their corn. But we can't even say for certain what the value is for each and every tanker load of DAF which is spread on the field. And that is why it's not a fertilizer, but is a soil amendment. The greatest value that DAF has is the money the handlers make in getting rid of it. There's so much more to say. Of course, there's a stench, which you've heard about. There's the road deterioration and the subsequent maintenance required. There's a safety issue, and that's getting to be a pretty big issue out our way. And there's the reduced value of our homes, because who wants to sink $350,000 into a home when on any given day it can stink? And I'll add that today was the first day that I've smelled it in my house. I got up this morning and I woke up and I smelled it, and I called my neighbor who lives around the corner from me. It was in her house too. So it was really, really bad this morning. Let's not forget all the erroneous assertions on the application and the reasons given in a memo to the county exec as to why this permit was legitimate. I feel like I've been snookered, and quite frankly, I think we all have. I think I urge you to begin the process of revoking this permit. We feel that you have been given the authority in the county code to do so, not to revoke it yourselves, but to start the process of perhaps looking at revoking it. And I encourage you to look at it seriously. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kenny. Do we have any more comments? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carol Donahue. Can you hear me? I'm from Whitehaven, not far from Porter Mill Road. And I'm here today for the Wicomico Environmental Trust. We sympathize fully with the neighborhood action group's concerns that you've heard tonight and elsewhere. And we also support a further moratorium on the construction of additional DAF storage tanks. We'd like to comment briefly on two additional concerns about this particular tank that we've identified in following this matter closely. We've been considering a potential brief in future court proceedings, if any, and we've identified two sets of comments. One is that there are a number of environmental risks that have not been considered yet, or not fully considered yet. As you've seen from the recent photos and heard, the tank is operating actively. It's holding 3 million gallons of waste, and it's full. The location and the design of the tank risk contamination of our groundwater and other pollution of our watershed because it has an open tank. It has no berms to safeguard against overflows from the heavy rainfalls that have become commonplace here. The frequent tanker traffic that you've heard about from the neighbors through residential areas and farmland raises additional spillage risks. And the tank liner is made of glass. There are risks associated with that were identified in the permit application. The glass can break in some circumstances, and there are no catchments there to safeguard against the risk of flooding or leakage. The tank is operating on ground that's often wet, with a drainage ditch along Porter Mill Road at the end of the driveway that floods easily. In heavy rain, That area of the road is
Somebody's
covered by
alarm.
water. The ditch on the tank side floods into the ditch on the other side, which runs into Rewastico Pond, about a quarter mile from the tank, and then into Rewastico Creek, which is barely half a mile from the tank. And from there, as you know, into the Nanticoke River. If the tank overflows or the material leaks, the waste runs through other properties into our local watershed and then the bay. Another serious concern is that the tank sits on or very near what's called the potential groundwater recharge zone. That's been identified by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation in its atlas of the Nanticoke watershed. What that means is that nitrogen and other surface substances that spill or leak from the tank can percolate into the aquifer that's supplying county residents with their drinking water. Groundwater contaminated in the zone can also pollute the bay. The Wicomico Environmental Trust is very concerned about that. Finally, the record in the case indicates that the zoning personnel who permitted the tank understood the project to be exempt from any stormwater management, soil conservation, forest conservation regulations. None of those regulations were applied to this project before the permit was granted. And there is no indication that zoning or other county officials have reviewed the project for runoff, flooding, or other spillage risks, or for any environmental or public health risk at all. And so it is the position of WET that a more thorough review of the facts and the law is warranted on this project. We also identified permit process concerns. The permit was granted the same day the application was received without any hearing. And it was understood by the zoning personnel, apparently, that the tank was automatically exempted from all of these otherwise applicable regulations because it was considered an agricultural use that was inherently permitted because of the A1 zone. But even after the state raised stormwater management concerns and twice requested amendments to the permit application, some requirements still weren't applied properly because the disturbed acreage was underreported by the applicant, and the site was not inspected by the zoning personnel. Now, the Wicomico Environmental Trust, just to wrap up, appreciates the importance of agriculture to Wicomico County's economy. We have 2 farmers on our board of directors. My father's a farmer, but we see this project as a cautionary tale on the risks of interpreting the agricultural exception so broadly that it encompasses activities of an industrial nature. We renew the call we've issued before for a modernized zoning approach, like those that are already in place elsewhere, that appropriately differentiates true agricultural uses for others. This is important so our local farmers can continue to enjoy the right to farm without having other uses like this call the existing zoning exemptions into question. And it's important to protect the health of all county residents and our shared environment, quality of life. In the meantime, we'd urge you to not only approve a further moratorium, but also to strengthen the permitting procedures that currently apply to ensure appropriate review and the correct application of current laws. Thank you for your consideration, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more public comments? Okay, no more public comments. Moving on to council comments. Do we have council comments?
I think for the
Mr.
public's knowledge, this isn't council comments necessarily in reference to this topic.
Yes.
It's council comments in general, I would assume, because we will be holding a work session
Yes.
in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Holloway?
Good evening, and thank everybody for coming in tonight and the ones watching on TV. I just have 2 or 3 comments. School's getting ready to partially reopen, so we want to be aware of school buses on the road and be careful and watch out for the kids along the road waiting for the school buses. Also, it's harvest time. A lot more tractors on the road, slow-moving trucks, combines. In the mornings especially, that's hard because of the sun coming up. You know, it can be blinding. The other thing I want to touch on is I had a lot of concerns about polling places for the election coming up. And the only thing they had on the east side was Beaver Run, and we had a lot of concerns from the citizens from the Pittsville, Willards, Powellville area. And thanks to the election board in Wicomico County, the members of the Board of Elections, and thanks to Delegate Hartman and Mary Beth Carosa, a lot of citizens were contacting me, and they were aware of that, and they worked out a plan. So now they are going to have a polling place at Willards Elementary, plus a drop box at Pittsville. So that's a big improvement over what we had. The problem with Beaver Run is not only the distance, is they're undergoing construction out there with a new school, and there was probably going to be somewhat of a lack of parking and accessibility to the building. So they worked real hard on trying to get that done, and I appreciate that. Appreciate their help on that. I do want to touch on one thing. Miss Tiggle was in tonight, and she mentioned the Pittsville branch. And I think during her comment, she made a comment about there was no input from the citizens. A little history on that. The citizens first contacted me and stated they had an idea about expanding the branch in Pittsville because it is in a double-wide trailer. And somebody knew about this building that was on the corner of 353 and Route 50. And was a body shop. It's a very, very nice building. And they had the idea that maybe they could move this branch library into that on a temporary basis until a new library was built in the future. We would know that it would probably take 10 years to get a new library built by the time you got the funding done. Council members can't build or renovate libraries, so I got in touch with Mr. Culver. And Mr. Culver met with the citizens, and he talked to them. He met with the owner of the building. They worked out a deal with a lease. They were pretty much sure they could get it done. The citizens that were involved in this were very happy. It was going to about triple the size of their library. It was going to be next to the school down there. It was going to be a rent or a lease on the building, so it wouldn't have been anything that was going to be forever in that building. There was a chance in the future to put a new library on the east side. But apparently this didn't sit well with the library board or the director of the library. And I really feel the citizens on the east side of the county were shortchanged. This was a good opportunity for this to happen. So I'm sorry that didn't happen. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Holloway. Do we have any more comments? Councilman Hastings.
First of all, I'd like to, of course, thank everyone who come out and spoke, especially those who are interested in the Porter Mill situation. We will, of course, talk about this as soon as we get done council comments. Second thing I want to say was, of course, the coronavirus. We did have another individual, another Wicomico resident die this week. We are now 49 residents of Wicomico have died due to this disease, and we've had an uptick. We've had nearly 100 cases in about a week in Wicomico County. So please, hopefully, folks continue to take this serious and be diligent. Third thing I want to say was it was good to see earlier Tim Mayer and Amy Kraus, the National Federation of the Blind. I know Tim and others do a really amazing job with the summer camps that they do for some of the blind, and I don't think that gets enough attention. They really do a great job. The other things on the note on the library, It is a shame that we are the lowest funded in the state. And I didn't get an answer as far as what's happened with the library board appointments. I'm not sure if the library board appointments are still need to be approved by the council, but if so, I'd like to see that move forward. And last thing, voting, of course, we've got 4 weeks from today until the election. October 13th is the deadline to register to vote. October 20th is your deadline to request a mail-in ballot, and then, of course, November 3rd, the election. So, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman Hastings. Mr. Cannon, Mr. McCain, Mr. Davis. Okay, thank you. If you notice, council members and some of the staff have on pink ribbons. We're doing this in honor of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And next meeting, we're going to offer a proclamation. I, too, want to thank everyone for showing up and engaging. I think that's very important when you have your say and your voice on things that go on in the county, so thank you for attending. I do want to thank the Maryland Department of Transportation again for that meeting. Typically, we'll have that meeting on a different night, but since they couldn't attend, we thought maybe we could fit them in with the regular council meeting, so that's why it was done by WebEx tonight, and it went pretty smooth for the most part. We talked earlier, and they had a lot of big hiccups throughout the county because they're going to all 24 jurisdictions, and I think ours went pretty smoothly, so I'm not a big fan of WebEx or Zoom meetings, but I think it went pretty smooth. I talked to Ms. Hurley yesterday, and I think I'd like to see if Mr. Gutierrez or somebody from the Board of Elections will attend the next meeting to explain the process for the elections, because there's going to be some more rules, and then discuss the different locations. So look forward to seeing somebody from the Board of Elections at the next meeting. So with that said, I need a motion to adjourn from legislative session to go into an open work session, and second.
So moved.
Yep, and who's my second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? So moved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, and good evening again. I'm going to put my flaps down. The purpose of this meeting tonight, this work session, is to discuss the moratorium on these DAF tanks that is currently in effect and will be expiring, if it's not extended, will expire at roughly the end of this year in December. And whether the council wants to go forward with it, and if they do want to go forward with it, what they should do in addition to passing another bill to extend it. There's been comment, in public comment, quite a bit about the existing tank and the problems that it's causing. That's not really the subject of this work session tonight. If council wants to explore that, that's fine. We can certainly do it, but I would suggest that we cover the moratorium part first, so we decide, how get a rough idea of how you want to proceed on that. Because if you want to extend it, it'll take legislative action to do that. The moratorium has been passed twice by council, each for a 6-month period. In each case, it was vetoed by former Executive Culver and was overridden by the council. However, other than that, and other than a meeting that council had during the summer with the representative of the Delmarva poultry industry, there really hasn't been much in the way of any action to do anything in terms of addressing it and changing the zoning code. The purpose of the moratorium was to allow further study and action to change the zoning code. So I'm not going to say we're at ground zero, but we haven't progressed very far from that. And there's a general risk in imposing any kind of a moratorium on land use that to some extent it is a deprivation of someone's right to use their property. For the purpose of my comments tonight, I'm assuming, just as a hypothetical, that right now, these tanks are permitted. I'm not saying that that would be the ruling of a court, but in terms of addressing it from what the risk is, you would assume that they're permitted. Because if they're not permitted, in other words, if the litigation that's currently going on results in a ruling that they're not permitted, well, then obviously the moratorium's not needed, and there's no deprivation of anybody's property rights. So at least for the purpose of the discussion, I'm approaching it from that basis. And the concern is that if you just continue it, excuse me, if you can just continue it without doing anything, it's in effect a de facto amendment of the zoning code to prohibit the particular use, in this case, these storage tanks, and the use of it to store this material. I've provided a memorandum to you yesterday, I think Ms. Hurley sent it out, that discusses the legal basis for this issue that I've just raised, this risk issue of a potential taking of someone's property due to a moratorium. The courts are fairly lenient as long as the legislative body is proceeding in a reasonable and serious way to address the underlying issue that caused the moratorium, but it can't just go on endlessly forever. So my suggestion is, and I put this in the memo, if you're going to extend the moratorium, you need to begin to become more actively involved in this and see if you can't get it wrapped up in a reasonable time period. I would suggest probably 6 months if you started today or at the next meeting and began to move this. If you're going to change the zoning code, the process would be to suggest an amendment to the planning director. The planning director would then issue a report on the proposed amendment. That would go to the planning commission. The planning commission would make its recommendation, and then it would come back to council, the proposed amendment. It wouldn't have to be approved by the planning commission. They could recommend one way or the other, and it would still come back for action by the council. That process in itself is probably going to take the better part of 6 months, even if you started very quickly to move forward, because the first thing you'd have to do is decide what you want to do, what you want to propose as an amendment. So that in broad overview is the situation with the moratorium and continuing it if that's the council's decision. You obviously can't make that decision tonight, finally, but you can certainly discuss it and reach a consensus tonight. So that, if there are any questions on it, I'll be glad to answer them, but I think it's, to some extent, the ball's in council's court.
I think, well, based on those comments and the obvious fact that we're far from resolving this, that we need to extend the moratorium. And whatever path we take, it will easily take us 6 months to resolve it. So, and our risk is kind of non-existent as long as we are progressing toward, whether that's an amendment or whether it's, whatever path we take, as long as we progress toward addressing this issue, from the council's perspective, and given the fact we have no other pending applications or anything, I think we're fine, extending it, but we do need to obviously act on this and decide which direction we want to go.
I agree. Mr. Cannon?
Yes, Mr. Taylor, did you say that the current moratorium expires in December? Is that correct?
Yes, I think it's, you may have the exact date, Laura. We talked about this.
All right, let's just say,
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's roughly mid-December.
November 5th, I think.
Okay, then I would say we certainly do need to extend it. I don't see any problem with that. Keep in mind that, this is for the public in general, is that this council hasn't really been stalling on this issue. We haven't really had an opportunity to fairly discuss this with planning and zoning since this whole process started, and that is why we created the moratorium, to give planning and zoning time to give us an opinion on what they thought might be our options. But the planning and zoning over the last year has not been allowed to sit with the council to review this. I think things may be different now, where we can work hand in hand with planning and zoning to find out what the solution might be. I am a very strong advocate of farming. I'm a very strong advocate of agriculture and poultry. I have a concern over this DAF tank, and I think others do as well. I think that Mrs. Kenny's letter was probably the most concise explanation of or argument as to why this DAF tank and the storage of the DAF material may not be what we want to see in Wicomico County. Despite how things might be, as she stated, I'm going to assume this is all valid information. When you have MDE considering this an industrial material, or however you might call it, when you have Delaware and Virginia considering this to be industrial, where is Wicomico County on this? You have to ask that. I think another really great point that was made is, and this is something I missed entirely. I figured, okay, this is DAF material, it's brought in, and it's brought in, the purpose of that is to allow them to, fertilize their properties. But there's a real restriction on this. This product can only be used out of this DAF tank on the property of the individual farmer who's using it. So it's not like fertilizer, where a product is used on all farms for all farmers and on the agricultural business as a whole. It has to be isolated to one person on one piece of property. And I don't think, if it isn't, it's an industrial use. That's one stipulation, that it has to be used on that farmer's individual property, or else it's considered industrial. So, and I don't even really know, but I would suspect that this isn't even being used as a fertilizer. It's being just used as a process by which to put it into the ground to dispose of it. So that in itself, to me, suggests that we're not threatening the agricultural industry. We're not threatening the poultry industry. We're just simply, I think, in need of trying to take some type of measures more in line with what we're seeing Virginia doing, what we're seeing Delaware doing. And I don't think it's radical. I certainly would like to hear from the poultry industry and the Farm Bureau, whomever else, to let us know, wholeheartedly, how this is going to impact their industry. Other points that were made that I think were very strong points is the fact that in Delaware, in Virginia, in Dorchester County, in Talbot County, the poultry industry and the agriculture industry didn't disappear because they put restrictions on the DAF tanks. They're very successful. They are thriving in all of these areas. So I think that Wicomico County is going to need to try to look at taking some type of a position. I think that the fact that Dorchester requires that there be a special exception, a hearing for a special exception, maybe that's the route we want to take. That could be cut and dry and very simple, and it would be a first step, because we have to begin somewhere. We're now available, I think planning and zoning is now available to help us. They need some direction. Maybe we want to suggest to planning and zoning, look, let's develop a permitting process on this, whereas it requires a special exception, just for starts. And then we can go from there on out. The public has to recognize we can't do anything as a council, as I understand it, with the current DAF tank that is there. That, I'm afraid, is now in the litigation process period. I'm not so certain there's anything the council can do as a legislative body to address that DAF tank. But I think we can take measures to begin to address the concerns that we've heard tonight, and I think with the concerns that are legitimate within our county as to how we handle the DAF tanks in the future. Thank you.
Right. And it is my understanding that there's litigation going on, so we probably should limit our discussion about that specific tank, but we do need to talk about moving forward with this moratorium. The first time we did it, we decided to do the moratorium for 6 months instead of a year, hoping that the staff would work with us and have a quicker timeline, but that didn't work out, and then next thing you know, a year is up. So here we are trying to extend it again, and it sounds like everyone's on board with extending it, but we also need to talk about legislation. So probably won't get anywhere with that tonight. So I think that deserves another work session. So, is everybody on board with extending this moratorium?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Mr. Cannon?
Go ahead, Josh.
Or
Sorry.
Mr. Hastings?
I'll just be brief. First of all, I think well said with what Mr. Cannon said, and I do appreciate the folks who spoke on this. I definitely agree. First, to be clear, we have tried to move this issue. We have worked, if it weren't for COVID, we would have had much better communication with Department of Agriculture and others, but they've held off. So we've been trying to navigate that. We do want to avoid any kind of inverse condemnation or anything like that. But above all else, I think we just need a process to it. I'd like to have a better understanding. Maybe talk with Mako, and then find out exactly what other counties are doing. And maybe it could be a simple fix. And that might take a process, as Mr. Taylor pointed out. That could be a 6-month process for any kind of potential zoning changes. But I don't know if we want to consider a 9-month moratorium or something a slight bit beyond that. But one way or another, Ms. Kenny's letter, King Burnett actually also sent over a great memorandum, and both had really great points within that. Speaking broadly and very briefly, our county is also looking at extending water and sewer. If we're going to grow, we're going to build new houses. A lot of that space is probably going to be just outside the city or in places near Hebron or others. We can't grow if we don't have, if we have a situation where folks are upset with the surroundings, and so we need to find better balance there. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mr. Cannon?
Yes, to follow up on the permitting process, Mr. Taylor, could you maybe, I don't know if you could review that for us. I'd really be interested, I think it would benefit the council if we would have some idea as to creating a permitting process that required a hearing for a special exception. I know that's in a lot of different parameters of planning and zoning, but could you give us a breakdown on what that would entail? Not now, on what that would entail, what the pros and cons of that might be, what the impact may be on the industry, or the whole spectrum of what that would entail?
Well, I mean, I can answer it in a very general terms. Obviously, the impact would be on how many permits are issued, and you can't really speculate on that. I mean, that would be up to the zoning board of zoning appeals. So it's kind of an open-ended question. I can't really answer it, and I don't think anybody else can very definitively. I think one thing that's worth pointing out, I didn't want to get totally into the weeds because I think we need to focus on that moratorium extension.
I think we're there.
But just so you're aware of it, and I have done some research on this, the state position seems to be that the spreading of the material is something that they control. And by that I mean that if there would be any local legislation to limit spreading, that probably there would be a preemption issue, a preemption by the state regulations. However, the storage of it, apparently they feel that that is a local matter that can be controlled locally. And there's at least one other county that I'm aware of, and I mentioned it in the memorandum. Somebody brought this to our attention the other day. Queen Anne's County has what is essentially a special exception mechanism for storage. So they have what you, I think, are mentioning.
Well, maybe what I would like to see then is what Queen Anne's has put together and what Dorchester County's put together.
Yeah.
That might be a guideline on where we can begin.
And I don't know what other counties do. I mean,
Well,
I haven't
or-
looked, but we did find out about Queen Anne's County, and we heard Talbot County mentioned tonight. I haven't seen those regulations. It sounded like from the discussion that the Talbot County regulation had more to do with the processing of it rather than the storage of it. So I don't know, but that was my impression when I heard the lady speak.
And I know we're not going to resolve all this tonight, but, we don't even have basic parameters around this. We have nothing that, addresses the number of tanks. Right now, basically, there's nothing in our zoning code that limits the number of tanks. There's nothing that limits the size of the tanks, other than the amount of area you need to put the tank on. I mean, those are just basic zoning amendments that you have, in any type of use, and so, we that's not even addressed in our code at all. So whether that's addressed through special exception or whether it's addressed through an amendment, but those are the kind of things we'll have to talk about when we
Councilman Holloway.
Work session.
I think we need to really talk about, instead of tanks, the storage of the material, because somebody could build a tank. I think the tank that's been in use for the longest time in Wicomico County probably wasn't even built as a DAF tank. It was built as a tank to store something else. So, somebody could come in and say they were building a silage tank, or they were, building a tank for a hog farm or whatever, and it be used as a DAF tank in the future. So instead of just addressing the tank issue itself, it's the storage of the product. And so that may be a route we need to address rather than just the tank part of it. So.
Yeah, the Queen Anne's County regulation has to do with storage. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a tank or a pit or what have you.
That would be helpful, Mr. Taylor.
I'm not big on reinventing the wheel, so I agree with you, Mr. Cannon. I think we need to look at Queen Anne's County, Dorchester, Talbot, the rest of the counties, even see what the lady mentioned, Denrex, see what Sussex County or the state of Delaware has on it. Every time somebody speaks, I learn something or something sinks in. Maybe I didn't pay attention to it earlier, but every time somebody sends an email and I read it, I learn something. And I think Mr. Cannon was trying to say industrial waste. I think he left out the waste part, but that's what I heard several times tonight, waste. So I'm thinking it's whatever is on the ground. It's whatever they clean. Are they using cleaning products? Is that part of the waste? If that's part of the waste, is it bleach? In my other life, that would have been a hazardous material, and we would have been very sensitive in how we disposed of that. So that really concerns me. So I guess on that part, I need to learn to find out what that waste product is, because it is called an industrial waste. So what is in that waste, and is it being disposed of properly? Is that what's happening? Is it being disposed of, or are they using it as a fertilizer, which I don't think they are. If they're at 3 million gallons right now, it sounds like they're going to need another tank soon.
According to the Department of Agriculture, the state, Maryland Department of Agriculture, the material generally has a very small nutrient value of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It's not real high on either of those, the three main soil nutrients.
That's why they use the term soil amendment.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a made-up term.
But it does apparently have some value in terms of nutrients. And that's, I guess, why they consider that the state, as far as spreading it on land, that their regulations control. There's been no litigation on that as far as I'm aware. I would just make you aware of the fact that about 30 years ago, more or less these same kinds of issues came up with sewage sludge. And initially, they allowed the counties passed regulations to control it that were challenged in court and upheld. The state changed the regulations to essentially preempt the counties on sewage sludge. So there is, and that also was challenged and sustained. So there's a history in terms of sewage sludge, but not poultry sludge.
All right.
I just might point out, because Mr. Cannon mentioned it, that the county council has had nothing to do with the issuance of this permit for the tank that's been mentioned tonight. It can't issue permits. It can't cause them to be voided. It doesn't have that power now that we've changed to the county executive system. That's an executive branch function. It can ask and make suggestions, certainly, as I think was one of the comments tonight. Again, that's up to the council.
10 years. Any more comments? All right. Do you have another comment, Mr. Hastings?
Mr. Taylor stole the words out of my mouth. I was going to say that there were a couple folks that seemed to infer that this is that our body had something to do with the current tank that is under question. That obviously it's not something that we have the power or authority over at this point, or at least the current project as folks in the Porter Mill area know it. But I also just wanted to emphasize too, the 6 of us are definitely hardcore agricultural advocates. and I want to make sure that that's known. This is not something, we have had a lot of folks from the agricultural community, a lot of farmers folks that I grew up with are also, have come out against this particular, the project that has been at question tonight. So, yeah, I just want to let folks know that we are working on it, and we are going to continue to try to find some sort of common ground. So thank you.
And Mr. Taylor mentioned earlier that legislation couldn't be passed in 6 months or it'd be cutting it close. So with that said, Mr. Hastings mentioned 9 months. Do we want to go at 6 months, 9 months, or do we want to go for a year for this moratorium? Is that, if we do
I think we could, definitely do 9 months or even a year, because if we come to a resolution sooner, then so be it. But that saves us.
I got a feeling if we're going to do 6 months, we'll be back here doing
Right.
the same thing.
6 months disappears pretty quick.
Yeah.
How do you feel? 9 months or a year?
Let's do it a year,
Go for a year?
like Bill says.
Okay.
We want to get it done sooner than that.
Right.
Ms. Harley, can we get that ready for a resolution?
Yeah, we can have it ready for introduction at the next meeting.
Next meeting, okay? So we'll talk about that moratorium at the next meeting with the resolution. Any more discussion on this? All right, need a motion.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you, everyone.